My name's Peter Saffin, the CEO of MAV. Most of you probably have seen me around now. I'd first like to start with an acknowledgement. La Trobe University and the MAV acknowledge the Wurundjeri people as the traditional owners of the land upon which this Bundoora campus is located. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who continue to contribute to the work of improving Indigenous learning, education and research. So welcome here today. As you know, the theme for MAV 18 is Teachers Creating Impact. We have an emphasis on sharing best practice, new ideas and innovative approaches, and a lot of the sessions you'll see today are teachers presenting their work to others and engaging with you with practical ideas to take away and implement. We hope you enjoy those sessions today and that you all gain something from it. On behalf of the MAV Council, I'd like to thank our sponsors. We've got for today, or all year actually, Casio, Texas Instruments and Cambridge University Press as our 3 annual supporters who contribute financially to make this event a great success. We also have this keynote sponsored or supported by ANZ UK, who are a sponsor with us for the first time this year. You'll also see their branding on their lanyards. I hope you'll visit all of our sponsors in the exhibition area, say hi and see what they've got to offer you today. If you could please just join me in thanking our sponsors. I'd also just like to thank our volunteers on our conference committee and those helping here today who've put a lot of work into helping build our program and making this event a success. And if you see our volunteers in there, either La Trobe Uni colours or fluoro jackets around, they're here to help you find your way to sessions. So please watch out for them. Can I ask you to switch off your mobile phones if you haven't already, so we don't have any going off during our session, or pop them on silent. We'd like you to pop them on silent because we'd like you to tweet. And our hashtag is MavCon at the bottom there. If you could tweet today, that would be fantastic. You'll see that up around the hall as well to remind you later. Certainly during Alan's talk today, pop out some interesting ideas for people to consider. Now I'd just like to introduce Alan Finkel, our keynote. So Dr. Alan Finkel, Order of Australia, commenced as Australia's Chief Scientist on 25th of January 2016. He's Australia's 8th Chief Scientist. Prior to becoming Chief Scientist, he was the 8th Chancellor of Monash University and the 8th President of the Australian Academy of Technology and Engineering. And I suggest if you move to China, you'll be very lucky with number 8. Since commencing as Chief Scientist, Dr. Finkel has led the Review International Electricity Market, the Finkel Review, which many of you will have heard of, and the 2016 National Research Infrastructure Roadmap. He currently leads the STEM Industry Partnership Forum for COAG Education Council and serves as the Deputy Chair of the Innovation and Science Australia. Dr. Finkel has an extensive science background as an entrepreneur, engineer, neuroscientist and educator. He was awarded his PhD in electrical engineering from Monash University and worked as a postdoctoral research fellow in neuroscience at the Australian National University. In 1983, he founded Axon Instruments, a California-based ASX-listed company that made precision scientific instruments. After Axon was sold in 2004, Dr. Finkel became a director of the acquiring company. In 2006, he focused his career back in Australia and undertook a wide range of activities, including co-founding Cosmos magazine. During his time at ATSE, he led the development and implementation of the Stellar program for secondary science. I also know Alan has done some reports recently, which he'll touch on today, which are very relevant to mathematics education and the future of education in Australia generally. I know this is very much a passionate area for Alan, and I think he's a real advocate for our profession. So I really look forward to him challenging some assumptions today and really giving us some food for thought. Alan, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. Peter, thank you for your kind words, and I'm looking forward to further engagement with the Maths Association. Peter has promised you a bit of a fiery speech on the importance of mathematics, and I would hate to disappoint Peter because I know him well, and he's providing morning tea for all of us, so We have to keep on the good books. But first, I want to take a moment to bask in the glory of this astonishing year of triumphs for Australian mathematics. 2018, you'd all know that that's a composite number composed of two prime numbers multiplied together. Other than that, I think it's actually quite boring. But more to the point, it's been a vintage year in terms of what's been achieved. And we could begin in January with the Australia Day Awards. Australia, meet the head of maths from Cherrybrook High, Mr. Eddie Wu, who I think is talking at the same time in another lecture theatre. He's a teacher, he's a YouTuber, and now he's officially our local hero. Then it was May, and the Australian mathematician Geordie Williamson was elected at the age of 36 as the youngest living fellow of the UK Royal Society. And he's not just the youngest living fellow in the mathematics field, he's the youngest living fellow full stop. There is an exception. Prince William is a fellow of the Society, but I think he's in a category of his own. And then to July, and brilliant news from Romania. 2 golds, 3 silvers, and our bronze for our students at the International Mathematical Olympiad, for an overall ranking of 11th, which is our best performance since 2015, and our 3rd best of all time. And 40% of the mathematics Olympians were from Victoria. And also in July, and right here in Melbourne, an Australian team of students took out first place in the International Mathematical Modelling Challenge. And that was the first time that we've done that. And Nalini Joshi, the first female professor of mathematics, I think in Australia, but certainly at the University of Sydney, was elected the Vice President of the International Mathematical Union, which is the highest position in the global maths community that an Australian has ever held. To August, and now it's the Fields Medal. What's the Fields Medal? Said every reporter in the country. Well, it's only the Nobel Prize for Mathematics, of course, with the difference being that you have to wait 4 years for each announcement of the Fields Medal, and only 60 people in history have received it. So it's extremely prestigious. And we can now add a second Australian name to that honour roll, Professor Akshay Venkatesh, who's also just 36. Then, and we're still in October, we're gathered again in Parliament House for the Prime Minister's Prize for Science. And Prime Minister Scott Morrison, in one of his very first speeches as Prime Minister, he went to the podium and he said these words, and I'm going to quote them because they're important and I do keep them on file. So I'm quoting. This is the Prime Minister. I'm channeling him. He's talking to the whole audience of 800 assembled glitterati. Do you think intermediate level maths should be a prerequisite for studying engineering at university? You'd think so. I would think so. And as Vice-Chancellors come to see me, asking me their usual questions, I'm going to ask them, what are your prerequisites for science and engineering courses when it comes to maths? We do need to reassert the importance of science and maths because that is essential if we are to have the pipeline of students that we require. That's the end of the quote. Now, also in October, we heard the news that Alison Harcourt had been named the 2019 Victorian Senior Australian of the Year, recognising her lifelong and continuing contribution to mathematics and statistics. At the age of 89, Alison continues to share her knowledge and passion as a tutor of mathematics at the University of Melbourne. And finally, to November. And who's in the news again but Professor Geordie Williamson? I mentioned him as the youngest fellow of the Royal Society. He's getting on a bit now. He's 37. But he's clearly still in a hurry because he's returning to Australia to head up our first specialist research institute for mathematics. And now to December. And the news was somewhat seismic in scale, but bittersweet. Professor Jeff Prince, the voice and heart and backbone of Australian mathematics, is stepping down after 14 years at the helm of the Australian Mathematical Sciences Institute. And it's only the 7th of December, so we've still got some time for a few more wins. And I know, and I'm sure that there are many thousands of triumphs that I haven't mentioned. I mean the sort of triumphs that happen in the classroom every day. When a student who couldn't turn a decimal into a fraction and was starting to think that she hated maths and was this close to ripping up the page and giving up, felt something click. And so many things about the world just made sense, from the price stickers in the supermarket to the numbers on the kitchen scales. And every time it happens, it's a win for maths. And every win for maths, in my opinion, is a win for the nation. So I acknowledge all those students and I celebrate all their triumphs with the teachers who brought them every step of the way. But December is not just a time for celebrating achievement, it's a time for reflecting on what comes next. Teachers are knuckling down to the piles of school reports, mostly finished. Parents are looking forward to receiving them. And students might be turning their minds to their subject choices for the years ahead. Now, it has been a long time since I was one of those parents, and even longer since I was a student. But you don't forget what it's like to be young, and to feel like you're taking your future into your hands. And every so often, a parent or a student will write to me seeking my advice. And I got one of those emails earlier this year. And I'm sincerely grateful to the family, and particularly the student, Marty, for the conversation that followed. And it's a true story. It's one thing to be invited to a conference, which is a routine part of my role as chief scientist, but it's a different thing altogether to be invited into a family circle. You can't swim. You can't agree to initiate a process to develop an outline for a blueprint for a discussion paper for a report. You have to focus on what's important and commit. And it occurred to me that that's exactly what teachers have to do every day. So I gathered up my thoughts and I communicated them to Marty and his dad. And I want to share with you my thoughts today as reflecting on my philosophy for what really counts. So with Marty, I began with the essentials. If I could only pick two subjects that every Australian would study for as long as possible in school, it would be English and mathematics. And there are three reasons why I say this, and I trust that every parent will agree. First, they're fundamental. English is fundamental because it's the way that we convey the thoughts and feelings from one human being to another. It's how we reason and argue and imagine and connect. On a practical level, it's how we write the cover letters that get us jobs. You need mastery of English. And mathematics, it's also fundamental because it is the universal language of the modern world. Maths is the language of science and economics and medicine and engineering. It's how we describe the increase of the money supply in our economy and the flow of heat in an electric motor. It's how we work out the lifetime cost of a real estate deal and the thickness of steel to ensure that new buildings will not collapse. So reason number one, English and maths, they're fundamental. Reason number two, they have to be learned. And that means they have to be taught by subject matter specialists in schools. Now, it's true that the human brain is an astonishing thing. And humans, left to their own devices, without education, will grapple desperately for ways to communicate and to count. But you know, we don't learn calculus by watching a cup of tea cool down. And we can't have any comprehension of what calculus is, let alone how we might want to use it, if we don't start laying down the mathematics foundations from day one. Now, it might be that a child wakes up on day one and doesn't feel like doing mental arithmetic practice. But we don't let children starve because they don't feel like eating. We don't let them go unwashed for a month because they decide that they don't like baths. And to my mind, it's just as cruel to give children the choice about maths at an age when they cannot possibly fathom the consequences. We have to make the choice today so that they will have the choice tomorrow. That goes for boys and it goes for girls. They are equally deserving of our high expectations and our constant support. And that brings me to reason number 3 for English and maths. They're empowering. They enable us to learn new things later on. Now, let me give you a list of the things that I didn't study at school. I didn't study computer coding. I didn't study neuroscience, electrophysiology, electronic circuit design, flying a plane, writing librettos for a symphony orchestra, scuba diving or property development. But all of those things were open to me as an adult, and I know because I've done them all. And I could do them because I had the essential foundations from school in English and maths. Trust me, you don't want to fly with a pilot who can't count. So start with the 2 basics, English and mathematics, and from there build up your knowledge of the world. Build up your knowledge of the world around us by studying subjects like history or chemistry. And there are 2 other studies that I encourage everyone to keep up with for as long as possible from an early age. A musical instrument and a sport. Now, music is sometimes called the language of the soul, the emotions, and sport is the language of the body. And just like English and maths, they are our shared inheritance with their own rules and conventions and codes. And just like English and maths, if you don't practice music and sport as a child, then you have to work incredibly hard to get half as far as an adult. And so you can see, I continued and I said to Marty, I'm approaching this question as a matter of stocking your mind. Now, Marty, let's talk about your ATAR. Do not, under any circumstances, choose your subjects by deciding the ATAR you want and working backwards to the easiest way of obtaining it. You will be told by people who pretend to be wise in the mysterious ways of ATAR that the higher the number, the wider your choice. They are wrong. Ignore them. Stay strong, Marty. Because those people are only thinking about the number that might get you into a university. They're not thinking about the skills that you actually need to come out of that university with a degree. You need to know, I said to Marty, that there are universities in this country who will accept you into an engineering course or a science course or an economics course despite them knowing that you don't have the foundation skills in mathematics. You also need to know what happens to students who take that guidance in good faith, drop maths in year 10 and turn up to university unprepared. They drop out, they fail, or they scrape through their degree at the bottom of the class. And then they're in no position to go out and compete for a job. You think that's outrageous? I agree. The Prime Minister agrees. Almost everyone agrees. Nothing changes. And no, I can't explain it either. But now that you know, Marty, you can avoid that trap. Read into the course guidelines the prerequisites that universities have mysteriously left out. Study to equip your mind. In particular, take mathematics at the level of your true ability. And rest assured that your focus and discipline will make your time at university more rewarding. Now, another thing you'll hear, I said to him, is that specialising in anything is a waste of time. All you need are skills like teamwork, public speaking, resilience. You don't need chemistry, engineering or law. But let me tell you, I've built a business. I've hired hundreds of people. I know hundreds of people who've done the same thing. And that's how I know that the wrong way to build a business is with a group of capable people who collectively specialise in nothing at all. If you want to be best in business, then you need real experts who can lift you above the generic thinking of everyone else. And you'll see them described in the business literature as T-shaped workers. And the pillar of the T is the discipline, the deep discipline knowledge. It's the knowledge and skills that come as easily as breathing, the mastery you can only acquire through hard work and determination. Climb that pillar and you can develop the bar, the capacity to work with others and branch out in new directions. When you're standing on that bar, you look at life with a whole new perspective. You see the opportunities that no one else can see, and you trust yourself to grab them. So master a discipline and give yourself a chance. And there our conversation ended. But I couldn't get the topic off my mind. I felt the urge to call every high school student in the country shouting, "Don't drop maths." But of course I'm a public servant these days, and I'm fairly confident that acting on that urge would be illegal. In any event, much better than a phone call from the chief scientist would be crystal clear guidance from the education system, so that students would always be nurtured in an environment of high expectation, with constant encouragement, and the message reinforced at every stage: this is important and you are capable. So I looked for those signals, and I felt like those scientists who are working to rescue threatened species. The signals are disappearing from the university course guides. The signals are not there in the popular culture or the media. And the signals are certainly not there in the approach we take to those critical national assets, the people who specialise in the teaching of maths. Why would you think that maths is important if for every year of your secondary schooling you were taught by an out-of-field teacher? In a country like Australia, it seems impossible that that could be true. But we have the figures published just a few weeks ago from the Australian Mathematical Science Institute. That's exactly what happens to 8% of our students. And fewer than 1 in 4 students is supported by qualified, expert maths teaching professionals all the way from year 7 to year 10. So 3/4, at least at one stage from year 7 to 10, are taught by somebody who has not had secondary mathematics. Because the definition that they use for in-field teaching for this study is one that the Maths Institute actually considers to be inadequate, which is a single semester of study at university. But the dedication of out-of-field teachers to their students is not the issue. The issue is the lack of commitment right across the system to the teaching of maths. And even if we woke up tomorrow and made it our top priority, the Maths Institute estimates that it would take at least a decade to turn things around. It's the chicken and egg dilemma. Without great teachers, we don't develop confident students. Without confident students, we can't train enough great teachers. So I put my comments, my concerns to some deans of engineering, actually it was all the deans of engineering, just about 2 months ago. And one of them said to me, "But Alan, if we were to reinstate mathematics prerequisites, the schools would have a problem because there are not enough secondary school mathematics teachers." "Of course there aren't," I replied. "That's because universities have stopped signalling the importance of mathematics. We're in a spiral." So the question for me and for this conference is where and how to intervene. So let me leave you with 3 of my recommendations, with a focus on what we can do right now, today. Number 1, keep up the pressure on universities to be a connected part of the education system. The lack of guidance provided to students about their subject choices, in my opinion, is unacceptable. And until we see improvement, we will continue to send the wrong message to students, to parents, to teachers, and to principals, such as advising them to try to gain the ATAR. And then we blame the ATAR. It's the wrong target. It's not ATAR's fault. ATAR is not meant to stand alone. ATAR is intended to be a team player. ATAR plays best as the goalie among the team of prerequisites. We shouldn't have to tell universities to face up to their responsibilities as a participant in the education continuum. For that matter, we shouldn't have to tell them that it's unacceptable to enrol students with a level of preparation that sets them up to fail. But as regrettable as it is, that is the position we're in. If this worries you, please take heart. You're in a position to express your concern to the Vice-Chancellors, to let them know just how hard it is, in the absence of a signal from the universities, to persuade your students that yes, they really do need to take mathematics at a challenging level, all the way to the end of Year 12, if they want to keep the doors of opportunity open. I am not advocating compulsory maths, but gosh, if you want to have all the choices available to you, keep it up. We should make it impossible for Vice-Chancellors to be ignorant of the fact that their policies have human implications and costs. It is possible for universities to change their position on prerequisites. 2 years ago, in 2016, the University of Sydney announced that it would be reintroducing mathematics prerequisites for 62 degrees, undergraduate degrees, starting next year in 2019. So they provided 3 years warning to the system. And I commend the University of Sydney for doing so. And I'm sure that every other Australian university will be watching closely. And I saw in the paper this morning that their enrolment figures are still strong. Number 2, we can do a much better job of celebrating those principals and schools and students who double down on maths and get the results. Australians have been told for a very long time that maths is in decline. And chief scientists and heads of mathematics institutes have been some of the people saying it. But too often, the conversation stops short at, we have a national problem, before we get to the second half of the sentence, we can and will do better. And mathematics teachers know better than anyone that when you set out to do something that's hard in the belief that you're hopeless and you're going to fail, it's amazing how often your prediction comes true. And that's why great teachers create an atmosphere of high expectation, and they pause to acknowledge the successes. We can all learn from the wisdom of teachers. And we don't have to imagine what success will look like. We can find the examples and pick out the common factors in actual schools. Earlier this year, my office, the Office of the Chief Scientist, published an occasional paper drawing on some research that we commissioned from the University of Tasmania. Our interest was in how do you improve in mathematics teaching. So we didn't look at the top performing schools. Instead, we looked for the top improving schools, which we defined as those who had NAPLAN numeracy scores that had significantly improved over a 2-year period. And there were quite a lot. We identified more than 600 schools that had this significant improvement over the 2-year period. So we asked the question, what did those schools have in common? And here are the top 3 characteristics. First, the principals and heads of curriculum who understood and valued, they had principals and heads of curriculum who understood and valued mathematics and made a point of regularly including the heads of maths in policy discussions. Second, there was in-school support for professional learning, and it was structured, it was embedded, and it was obligatory. And third, they had a cohort of mathematics teachers with confidence, not just in the subject, but in their school and its commitment to their development. 3 significant characteristics. And I don't have any doubt that none of this will come as a surprise to any of you here. But I want the message to school leaders to be absolutely clear. The responsibility for progress doesn't just lie with the teachers. It doesn't just rest with the education departments and politicians. True, we do need the universities to step up to the plate, but we can't wait for them. Schools themselves have to address the problem, and there is no better time than now. It comes down to the priorities and the policies in your school, and they're things within your power to improve. That's not to say that you shouldn't ask more from the system, which brings me to number 3, elevating our commitment to teaching as a profession. When I think about what it means to be part of a profession, I think about the way we train engineers, because that was my chosen degree, that's what I qualified in. Engineering courses are nationally accredited, actually they're internationally accredited, they have to meet international standards. And if you want to land a senior position, then you'll want to show your employer that your name appears on the National Engineering Register. In Queensland, it's compulsory to be registered. In other parts of the country, it's strongly advised. And then you have to maintain your registration. And that means meeting the requirement for continuing professional development. And currently, that's an average of 50 hours a year. And at least half of those hours, 25 of those hours, have to be focused on training that is specific to your discipline. Could be civil engineering, electrical engineering, chemical engineering, whatever. Of the 50 hours, half have to be discipline relevant or discipline specific. And your employers, they know this. They know in advance when they hire you about this commitment. And they factor it into the cost of employing accredited professional engineers. Because professional development is part of the packaged deal. So that's how I think of a profession. People we inherently trust, who can trust in turn that their employers will prioritise their discipline-specific training. So why don't education departments, as employers, include a requirement for discipline-specific training for teaching? Now, I know that across the country, teachers and organisations like the Mathematics Association of Victoria are already working hard to improve the professional status of teaching as a career, and I commend that. As chief scientist and as an individual who cares passionately about education, I ask, what more could the system be doing to support our teachers? Now, in the consultations undertaken for my report to the Commonwealth and State Education Ministers that I submitted earlier this year, which was on optimising the partnerships between businesses and schools in STEM education, we did a lot of consultation, and the issue of the composition of the 20 hours of professional learning that teachers are committed to undertaking every year, it came up frequently from teachers, from principals, from people in industry. And as a result, in our report to the ministers, which we submitted in April, we called for the strengthening of teacher professional learning to make sure that the 20 hours already required per year include a proportion of discipline-specific material, because today it doesn't. And we also called for the discipline-specific training to be delivered by accredited providers. To be fair, principals and education departments have to make sure that teachers have the time and the resources to undertake that discipline-specific professional learning. And to be meaningful, it has to be part of the continuing registration process, just like it is for lawyers, just like it is for doctors, and just like it is for registered engineers. So there are 3 ideas I'd like you to think about. Encouraging the universities to send proper signals to students and schools. Taking responsibility in our schools to implement best practices, and supporting all of our teachers as the professionals that they are. And if 2018 was a great year for maths, then 2019 can be even better again. So enjoy the conference and may the force be with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. We've got plenty of time for some questions. I know that we've got a lot of teachers here in the audience. We've got some university people who may have some views. We welcome questions at the moment.
I can see people wiping their brow, but...
Trish, I knew you'd be up for something. Yeah, okay.
One of the things we have in Victoria, and one of the measures that are used by people to judge schools, is the idea of the percentage of students who get a study score above 40. And I think in our state, what that has meant is a lot of schools who see this measure are encouraging some of our best students to work in further maths, which I think is a great course for the people to written for, but to choose further maths over specialist maths, because it's much easier to get a raw score above 40 in the figures in further maths than it is in specialist maths. And I have a battle with students, and I know in some schools, clearly, these kids should be doing specialist maths and they're doing further maths.
So that's exactly the problem I was talking about. I had a meeting with the Chief Executive Officer of UAC, that's the New South Wales equivalent of VTAC. And they're confident in the robustness of their statistical methods, and you can't game the ATAR. I don't believe that at all. And it actually doesn't matter, because the reality is everybody believes that you can game the ATAR. And so we've all got the anecdotes of a child who was advised to do phys ed instead of physics or Latin instead of chemistry. I had breakfast with somebody yesterday whose daughter was advised to do ab initio Spanish instead of physics. All from the point of view of getting a better ATAR, because today ATAR defines your fitness for entry to university. But it wasn't intended to be that way. So when I went to university, I think it was called TER, and then it became ENTER, and now it's ATAR. We've always had a way of measuring and then ranking across the state.
It's not as much the ATAR I'm referring to, it's more the actual study score, that they advertise the percentage you get a study score.
Oh, but okay, but is that adjusted or not adjusted?
So if that
it's part of the same problem though, because the adjusted study score becomes the ATAR, and the ATAR then becomes your entry capability for university. And so the reality is ATAR was developed when it wasn't a problem. People didn't do that when I went to school and when you went to school, because there were prerequisites. You chose your subjects for the right reason, and then the ATAR gave you the appropriate scoring ranks or the adjusted study scores out of 40. But without the prerequisites, it becomes the be-all and the end-all, and so there's no quality, there's no finessing, there's no thinking about subjects.
David, could I, if you'd like to add some clarification perhaps?
I think Peter noticed I was going to go into an apoplectic statement. I just sat here and looked at all the prerequisites for courses for Victoria. I think, as you know from your experience with Monash as a Chancellor, Victorian universities haven't dropped those requirements to mathematics or engineering courses and things like that. You can go online and look at the 2019, 2020 prerequisites. I agree entirely with the ideas about the misuse of ATAR, but I think there's a lot of mythology around that, in particular about reasons why students choose things. When you go north of the border, you don't have things which reward students with an 11-point bonus for the scaling for specialists. When you look at the stats, I'll be very clear that yes, there are some students who do further who might be also good to do specialist, but the numbers for kids doing specialist aren't quite robust, and they've been solid on methods and specialist. And the reason, which Alan identified very clearly, is because the universities have maintained those prerequisites. What I also know is that yes, there is a culture within schools which goes arguing about that competitive thing, and it's not the time and place to go into it. But study schools do not have that scale behaviour. They have a particular characteristic. It's what happens after that, and there can be plenty of discussion about that. But I think the key point which Alan made was, if you have an interest, and that's the best thing which supports that interest, go for it. Because we have 95% of kids who do a maths.
But David, nationally, I'm not talking about Victoria, nationally, out of 35 Bachelors of Engineering degrees, 14 do not have a mathematics prerequisite. 14 out of 35, that's nearly a third, or about a third, don't have a mathematics prerequisite. And across the nation, when you look at science, fewer than half have a mathematics prerequisite. Same with economics. You can't do economics and econometrics without calculus level maths, intermediate maths and above. It's all chasing students, and it sends the wrong signals. And whether it's true or not that people can game the ATAR, everybody believes that they can game it by maximising their scores.
I think that's the issue.
Yeah. Let's keep moving through some questions up the back.
Yeah, can I move the conversation away from ATAR? I work with a number of schools where the majority of the students don't do ATAR courses. in Victoria and outside of Victoria. And a lot of them were battling with students who were dropping maths in year 10, not doing any maths, or even dropping out of school in year 11, and going on to extremely well-paid apprenticeships. And I think we need to speak to employers who take students other than those from university and encourage them not to give these apprenticeships also without some sort of mathematics.
That's a big ask. Good idea.
My question is about universities have to go through all sorts of hoops for their registration. I think it's with TEXA, is that the authority?
TEXA, that's right.
Yes. Why isn't Prerequisites, why don't they have the authority to just impose this on universities?
So I haven't spoken to TEXA about that, but I have spoken to Engineers Australia, which accredits the engineering courses. TEXA doesn't normally go to that level of detail. They validate processes that the universities have faculty boards and academic boards, and they develop their courses appropriately. But when it comes to engineering, Engineers Australia validates all Australian courses against what's called the Washington Protocol, which is an internationally accepted level. And for reasons that I don't understand, it looks at course content, it looks at exit pathways, in other words, are the exams robust? It doesn't look at entry requirements. And the trouble is that if you take ill-prepared students and a large fraction of them fail in first year, so that's already unfair, but some of them do get through, but they don't blossom. Some, of course, there's always exceptions, but a lot of them will scrape through. And employers like myself and anybody employing an engineer, you don't employ somebody just because they wrote to you, that sounded good, and they've got a degree from a university. You put them through, not an interview, you put them through an audition. You give them a 3 to 6 hour test on, it could be finite element analysis for a bridge construction or a software challenge to see if they're any good. And the kids who scrape through don't get jobs in their chosen discipline. So we're not doing them any favours. I don't know why Engineers Australia won't look at the entry requirements. I've asked them to. I'm in discussions with their CEO and chairman. But there's this huge resistance to doing this because we've got a massified education system and the universities need students. And so you saw the race to the bottom, and I agree with David, it's not like prerequisites have disappeared entirely, but they are a threatened species, is what I said. You've seen this race to the bottom that accelerated about 10 to 15 years ago when the open placements emerged, and the universities want the students. Now, the universities will argue back that they do it for equity reasons, that they don't want to deny a smart kid who wasn't advised to do maths a position in economics. Well, I think if they truly cared about that kid, they'd pay for him or her to do a 1 year associate course in a college to get the preparation and then bring them into first year economics or engineering or whatever it is. But just giving kids bonus points doesn't help to prepare them. And so a kid that's come in because they actually did very badly isn't going to do well if they're not prepared. There are worse things about the ATAR. I mean, this is actually the simplest bit. The ATAR doesn't start from zero. Very quick question. Put up your hand if you think that the ATAR is comparing, it's a ranked list, if it's comparing the kids who sat the exam in year 12, their results. Okay, put up your hand if you think it's looking at all the kids who started year 12. Does anybody know what it actually is, what the cohort is? Put up your hand and tell us if you know what the cohort is. One person does.
My understanding is that it is the ranking of every person within that age group, so it includes...
And they define the age group as the kids who started year 7. But because we do not have a national student identifier, kids who either drop out or shift states or go overseas disappear from the state. From the state's ATAR system, from VTAC in Victoria or for UAC in New South Wales. So a kid who does miserably would get a high, maybe a 40. Whereas if you thought the ATAR was totally linear, you'd think, well, 40 is not that bad because you did better than 40% of the students. Not that's not terrible, but it is because of the way the ATAR is defined. So there are a lot of issues there.
And the direct entry is another issue.
Which is?
The direct entry.
Yeah.
In some courses, half the students don't even have an ATAR. They just.
But they try to give them an ATAR equivalent, but whatever, yeah.
You might come over this side for some questions. I know you've been waiting patiently.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my question was regarding the first round offers for ATAR schools that universities actually publish, and what they finally accept students into their courses for. They don't actually ever show the lowest score ATAR that got into that course.
No. The only thing they publish is the expected lowest score. You know, the so-called cut-off. They let a lot of kids in underneath by giving them bonus.
It's a lot lower than what they actually put on the first round offers, and it would be helpful for students to actually know that.
At the end of the day, the universities want students.
And also the other thing, anecdotally from my own students, they have gone to study science at Monash University, and they've been given extra points for their science subjects onto their ATAR. So I guess that's going some way to address students with a high ATAR that have not studied science, trying to do a Bachelor of Science degree, versus the kids who did do science, but perhaps...
So they're giving bonus for the kids who did high school science.
Yes.
So that's a per university decision, except I know in Western Australia, the whole state, all the universities there, I think there's only 3, but they've all agreed to give bonus points to kids who do intermediate and advanced mathematics on their ATAR. That's an okay thing.
Yes, at the back.
Apologies if this isn't so much a question but a statement to back up some of what you've said and to, I suppose, in the context of what David said, but I teach at a school where there's about 700 year 12 students. We've got one class of specialist maths. There has to be a cultural problem there somehow. Now, I can tell you what I think about that, but I'm just making a very clear point that that's not healthy. And in Year 11 methods, my top 2 students in 2 of my classes in the last 5 years told me that despite the fact they wanted to do specialist maths, they really did want to do it, it wasn't in their best interest to do it. They both, or one son he just left this year, the other one became an engineer. He told me his older brother told him in first year engineering, they basically go over all that stuff anyway, because they know the kids don't have it. So there is an issue. Sorry, it's not.
Yes.
No, you're right.
I would propose that if you want to boost the participation of maths amongst the general population of students, you make specialist maths prerequisite for medicine across Australia, and you will get kids doing mathematics, because I've come from Geraldton, and I remember that there was one girl who did medicine, and she was advised to do human bio instead, but she was adamant she wanted to do specialist maths because she felt that it would prepare her better for her medical degree. She was the only student in her maths class, and they had to have a specific one teacher for one student to do specialist maths, and she persisted through sheer stubbornness. Now she's gone on and she's doing really well in medicine, and she said, if I hadn't have done specialist maths, because we still keep in contact, I would have really struggled. And she said, doing specialist maths set me up for success at university, as you suggested.
And we just need a few of the leading universities to signal that, and it would change the behaviour, I think, across.
Yes, I actually agree.
Sorry, yes.
Good morning first. I have 2 ideas to support your argument based on my experience, my personal experience. Number 1, most of the European countries in the Middle East, universities where I came from, to be able to teach in high school, you must have a bachelor degree plus education diploma in a certain area. And most of the European countries, and they have like an agreement between university, schools, and Department of Education and government to support that project or that idea. So, to be able to, there is like faculty of education where you have to enter, pass an entry exam to get into a certain field. For example, mathematics. You need to pass an entry exam to enter to the maths area. Then you have to complete 5 years of study 4 degrees to get a bachelor degree, and 1 year as an education diploma. And on top of that, you get a full scholarship from day one. You enter university, and a contract to the government. You have to teach with them for at least 5 years because they pay you. This is number one. Number two, my two sons, finished university at major universities, and in high school, both of them, they did specialist, and both of them got 98%. And guess what? Dad, I don't want to be a math teacher like you. Why? Because the first one got a job with the federal government in Canberra as an economist, 15,000 above my salary. He was laughing at me.
So on both points, we used to have these sort of things where you could get paid to go to university and diploma in teaching, and you had to be bonded and work for 3 years. But somehow we decided that slavery was not appropriate for Australia, and so they got rid of that. But you are right that in many of the other countries, you don't do a Bachelor of Teaching degree. You do an undergraduate specialist degree in history, economics, mathematics, science majoring in chemistry or engineering, and then you do a diploma or a Masters of Teaching above that. And that's been discussed a lot, but there's no appetite that I can detect anywhere in any of the state education departments to have that. In fact, it's the opposite. So up until, I think, 2013, you could have a specialist degree. So you might have done an honours degree in science, majoring in chemistry, gone out and worked for a couple of years and decided you want to teach. You used to come back and do a dip ed, a 1 year dip ed, and be a teacher. Now you have to do a 2-year masters in teaching, which actually makes it much more difficult to consider doing that life change. And I speak to people and say, why did they do that? No one can tell me the answer. And for some reason, though, the co-ed education ministers all agree to do that. You could probably come up with your own cynical reasons to explain why.
So you have a question here.
Look, first of all, full disclosure, I'm an alien. I come from New South Wales, and before that I come from the UK, but I've got a bit of a sort of alien's eye view on Australian mathematics education. I'm also a professional learning consultant in New South Wales, so I've just taught 600 maths teachers across the state. And it strikes me that in Australia, one of the issues is that the tail wags the dog. So we're talking a lot about ATAR, and what leads to ATAR is the exams, and the underlying philosophy of the exams, certainly in New South Wales, but I'm sure it's similar in Victoria, isn't so much about assessing subject knowledge, assessing competency, assessing whether students have understood what their maths teachers have taught them and what they've learned. It's more about spreading out the distribution so that we can work out who doesn't go to university. And that's also what the ATAR does. Unfortunately, by ranking, you actually undermine growth mindset. You create a system where you demotivate students. All the motivation for students at the moment in Australia appears to be extrinsic, not intrinsic. And I mean, you were talking about take mathematics at the level of your true ability. What we actually advise in the Maths Association in New South Wales is actually take maths at a senior level, at the level which you think you might be able to cope with. Because I think the thing is with growth mindset and with mathematics and with a good nurturing teacher, you don't necessarily know whether you will or you won't succeed. And the trouble is that by just focusing on the number of years a teacher's learned mathematics, you're negating the side of teaching, which is possibly even more important, which is the nurturing human qualities of a good teacher. So I just think, looking from an outsider's point of view, we maybe need to try and turn the whole system around so the tail doesn't wag.
So my answer is it's all of the above. I don't think you can be a good teacher of chemistry or electronics or physics if you don't know your subject matter. But of course you also can't be a good teacher if you don't understand kids and pedagogy and how to inspire them. You need both. I just see it as a false dichotomy to say that it's one or the other. And as I said in my speech, young people, they're not necessarily in a position to know what's best for them. We have responsibilities as parents. We have responsibilities as teachers. And we're abrogating that. And I think the main, if I one thing is what I talked about again and again in the speech. I blame the universities for taking away signals as to what it is that you need to do to be well prepared for what you might choose. You don't know in year 9 or year 10 what you're going to do, fair enough, but if you think that you might do medicine and medicine has a prerequisite for specialist maths, you'll at least give it a try. But if medicine doesn't care and the only thing that at the end of the day matters is your ATAR, then why wouldn't you just make decisions to maximise your ATAR? The kids aren't stupid. The careers advisors aren't stupid. They're playing the system. And the system is letting us all down.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Is that right? Last one?
I was just going to say, what role do you think that TAFE and trade education things can do to support students that are potentially not going to go to university to develop and continue their mathematics?
It's a whole different area. It's our vet system. I might have been complaining about our university system. Don't get me started on vet. It's an important area. We've probably put a huge amount of emphasis on getting kids into university and undermined the vet system. And basically, if you're going to be a qualified tradesperson, because that's what you chose to do in a vet system, doesn't have to be that, but if you're going to be an electrician or whatever, you still need at least basic arithmetic. You need mental arithmetic to get through life, in my opinion. You can't always be stopping and using a calculator. I don't think you can do real estate if you can't convert from square feet to square metres, because half the people you're talking to are thinking square feet, but the stuff's being sold on square metres. It's not that hard. You roughly multiply by 10, and most of the people I know can't do it.
So I'd like to just wrap that up, and I'd also like to just add in this focus on ATAR, what we've seen at Student Maths Association with some of our programs like Girls in STEM and our Maths Camp is when we get the kids in and have a chance to talk to them culturally about why maths is important, or show them how it's used in industry by linking them with industry partners and giving them that real life experience, we then see that they're actually choosing the higher maths subjects because they're understanding that it's not all about ATAR, and they can make that decision in an informed way. So I think the culture in our schools and thinking about what else we can do with students to get them to recognise the value of choosing the maths that fits their best of their ability, whatever the words were, and showing them how it's applied in their careers in future can help them make some better choices. I know working with Trish on some areas around that's been very important. So I'd just like to sum up with that, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming and choosing to see Alan today. And thank you, Alan.